Imagine being a crown prince, raised among mirrors where no one sees the real you. All around you are uniforms, sabers, greetings, orders. And inside, you are scenes in which you do not exist. Only music, only shadows, only death in a setting you did not choose. Also, please subscribe to my channel and put a like on this video. Write in the comments your thoughts on this topic. I am very happy to explore the traces of the past together with you. Louis II seemed to stand on the other side of the glass from the moment he was born. He was born in August 1845 in Nymphenburg Castle, as if not in a royal family, but in a frozen decoration. The entire court, as if clockwork, celebrated the appearance of the new future ruler, but the boy himself was a stranger even in the cradle. His father, King Maximilian II, was a man of rules and discipline. His mother, Mary of Prussia, was cold and indifferent, like a wax figure. Their firstborn was supposed to be an ideal state machine, but from an early age, Louis was failing. He did not play with other children. Instead of toys, he chose silk fabrics, masks, theater posters, which he touched like relics. He stood by the window for hours, staring at one point, and when he was called, he did not answer right away. Sometimes he talked to himself, whispering phrases that no one understood. This caused superstitious fear in the servants, as if the boy was born with a soul from somewhere else. When Ludwig was 9, his father took him to the theater for the first time to see Wagner. It was the moment that would decide his whole life. The stage, the sounds, the figures in the candlelight, all of it entered him like poison. He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. He just watched. He would later say, "The theater is the only thing that brings me closer to God." He began to wear theatrical clothes, imitating the gait of opera characters. He did not dream of becoming a king. He dreamed of dying like Lohengrin in Radiance and Tragedy, saving an imaginary woman, and walking on water. When he turned 18, he received the throne of Bavaria. It was not a coronation. It was an exile. They put on a robe that he disdained as if it were diseased skin. The servants congratulated. The politicians bowed. The people rejoiced. But Louis himself did not look at anyone. His eyes were directed upward, to where the sky is always suspended in theatrical scenery. From the first days of his rule, he disappears. Literally, he skips meetings. He ignores receptions. He doesn't sign papers. The ministers are in a panic. But he calmly explains, "I have to think about the eternal. The state is temporary." He leaves at night, on horseback, alone, sometimes in women's clothing, under a black veil. He rides through the forest without saying a word, without turning around. Several times peasants accidentally see him and are frightened. They say that he is a witch or a demon. He rarely appears in the castle. His rooms are like stages. Everything is on display: velvet, gilding, draperies. But there are no people in them. He drinks alone, eats silently, reads tragedies, and writes letters to Richard Wagner, whom he considers almost a prophet. He demands a meeting, sends money, arranges rehearsals for 3, himself, the ghost, and the music. He is surrounded by people, but always alone, not because he is proud, but because he is different. His diaries are already full of strange notes. "The world is not mine. I live in someone else's time. I refuse to play this role. The ministers are losing patience. The entourage whispers about illness, about oddities, about vices, but no one dares to say it out loud. Because he is the king, even if he is not of this world, he didn't want to rule. He wanted to disappear into a fictional opera. Kings build fortresses to rule. Louis II built castles to hide. After he abandoned the real world, he began to create a new one from marble, gold, mirrors, and legends. What began as a desire for solitude soon became an obsession, to build not for the sake of grandeur, but to disappear into his fantasies. The first was Linderhof. Small as a toy hidden in the scaffolding, it resembled an opera set rather than a monarch's home. Each room was dedicated to a specific scene from Wagner's works. The ceilings were covered with stars, the walls with pastoral landscapes, and the light came from under the floor to make it seem as if a moonlit mist illuminated everything. Ludwig demanded that none of the servants approach him with their faces, only with their backs. A second castle appeared, Neuschwanstein. Built high in the Alps, it resembled a Gothic dream of a mad architect. Pointed towers, stained glass windows with the faces of heroes invented by Ludwig, stairs that led nowhere. One of the corridors ended with a wall painted with a scene of a night drowning. Each room inside had no entrance. The doors were fictitious. The tables rose from the floor on lifts so that no one could enter. He ate alone, looking at empty chairs, and talked quietly to imaginary guests. Sometimes he laughed out loud, as if someone had told him a joke. The servants said, "He eats with ghosts." Herrenchiemsee, the third castle, was the culmination of his madness. He built it on an island as a capricious response to Louis XIV's Versailles, but almost no one lived in it. It was not a building, but a museum for one person. The rooms, decorated with golden flowers, sparkled with candles lit each night for one guest, the king himself. Ludwig wandered alone through the halls, touching the walls and muttering, "This is a dream. I remain in it." All expenses were covered in secret. He took loans from private banks, got into debt without consulting anyone. The treasury was depleted. The ministers were horrified. He paid millions for polished columns, while the villages nearby starved. But Ludwig ignored both the people and the warnings. He created a world where poverty does not exist. His servants, by his order, were not allowed to look into his face. They approached him backwards, as if afraid to awaken the curse. If someone turned around, they were fired. The king did not tolerate other people's eyes. He said that another person's gaze could break the fabric of reality. Ludwig forbade noise, forbade mirrors. Windows were covered with thick curtains. Sometimes he ordered false doors to be built to confuse those who dared to enter. Architects went crazy with his demands. He insisted that the ceiling in one of the bedrooms depict the sky with dead birds. The servants complained that at night they could hear footsteps in the castle, although the king was asleep, and sometimes the opposite, that he wandered around but left no traces. One of the footmen swore that he saw Ludwig talking to a painting, and it responded. Another claimed to have found footprints on the castle floor leading into the wall. The letters to the architects became increasingly bizarre. Ludwig demanded that they build a room without an entrance which can only be entered in the mind. He asked for a secret hall for the worship of a swan that does not exist in nature. Sometimes he disappeared for days. They searched for him and found him asleep on a marble bench in the middle of the hall, holding a piece of an opera mask. He claimed to have spoken to characters in the play that he had invented. The king was alive, but within the illusion. Everything he created served only one purpose: to erase reality. His castles were not just palaces, they were his refuges, his theaters, his tombs in life. He ate with ghosts. He paid millions for marble, but he was afraid of people. He lived as if he were already dead. He was invisible during the day. The curtains remained closed. The rooms were plunged into semi-darkness. The doors did not open. But with the onset of night, Ludwig II came to life. He got out of bed, put on a long black robe with golden runes, and slowly walked out into the empty halls, as if he was making a funeral procession through his own mausoleum. He demanded absolute silence. No footsteps, no voices, not even breathing nearby. Servants laid felt on the floor, took off their shoes, wrapped cutlery in velvet so that nothing would jingle. He said, "Noise is the door through which reality enters." His walks were rituals. He didn't just wander around the castle. He walked in precise patterns, stepping only on certain tiles, repeating memorized phrases from Wagner's librettos. In one gallery, he whispered, "You won't hear me until I become you." In another, he simply sang, looking at the ceiling, where a scene of a king burning in flames was painted. The servants noticed that he began to talk to the paintings. Once he spent the whole night in front of the portrait of a knight, kneeling. In the morning, he said, "He forgave me." Then he ordered the canvas to be taken down and moved to the bedroom. From then on, no one saw the king sleeping without a candle burning next to this portrait. He could no longer bear reflections. All the mirrors in the castles were removed or covered with black cloth. Ludwig declared that another king lives in the mirror, whom I cannot control. When he accidentally saw himself in a silver tray, he screamed and threw it out the window. He wrote letters more and more often, but the recipients were dead. The messages began with, "Dear Matilda, my departed friend Richard, your humble student, Ludwig, now wandering in the abyss." He asked for forgiveness, shared dreams, asked for advice. The envelopes were sealed with wax and sent to nowhere. The Bavarian court began to talk aloud about the ghost king. Legends multiplied, that he disappeared into the walls, that his voice resounded in empty corridors, that at night he went out to the lake, stripped naked, and went into the water to meet his ancestors. The courtiers were especially worried about his relationships with young servants. He surrounded himself with handsome young men, not allowing women or elders to come near him. All conversations with them took place in private. He gave them expensive jewelry, rings with engravings from operas, letters with romantic poems. One of the footmen said that Ludwig ordered to call himself my Queen of the Night. There were rumors in the castle about night rituals, scenes where servants portrayed mythological characters, acted out tragedies, stood for hours in masks before the throne while the king watched silently. Some disappeared. They were fired without explanation. One footman disappeared forever, supposedly left for a monastery, but the monastery, as it turned out later, had long been closed. The food was brought in closed vessels and left in an empty room. Ludwig would enter, lock himself in, and eat alone. He said that those at the table were those no one sees. Once, by mistake, one of the cooks left a slice of meat on a plate and was fired for insulting the guests. With each passing month, the king became increasingly detached from light. He ordered new chandeliers in which every third candle could be extinguished to achieve the right darkness. He said that brightness reveals cracks. His eyes became cloudy, his gaze clouded. He hardly looked anyone in the face anymore. The servants began to write down his phrases. They sounded like they were from another world. There's someone inside me going around in circles, and I can't stop it. If I disappear, don't touch the locks. They hold me together. When the white night comes, I will go out to the swan, and he will take me away. He disappeared into castles like a ghost. He lived outside of time, outside of power, outside of reality, and those around him were afraid to breathe in his presence. The servants no longer called him king, only shadow. In the castles, the king disappeared from the world, but one day the world came to him, with signatures, seals, and the cold whisper of doctors. He did not hear the shot, did not see the sabers, did not meet the crowd. He was overthrown by silence. In Munich, the ministers could no longer close their eyes. The treasury was empty, the loans were unpaid, the people were grumbling. But the worst thing was that the king was disappearing, not metaphorically, but literally. He could not be found for days. Documents piled up on tables. Servants brought reports to empty halls. Ministers left dispatches at doors that no one opened. Then the decision was made to declare Louis II insane, without trial, without examination, without evidence. Doctors were called. None of them had seen the king in person. The diagnosis was based on the behavior described in the notes of servants and letters of architects. One night, June 10th, 1886, a group of people appeared around Neuschwanstein Castle. Officials, soldiers, the doctor, Bernhard von Gudden. They did not enter. They surrounded the castle like a monastery inhabited by something inhuman. They waited for dawn, but the king did not come out. The next morning they had to lie. Instead of an official order, they presented a fake letter, supposedly from the government. Ludwig was awakened in the dark. He was sitting in a dressing gown with an extinguished candle in a room without mirrors. The doctors entered, and for the first time they saw what they had been discussing on paper for so many years. He looked at them without blinking and said, "If you want to see madness, look into the mirror that I have destroyed." He did not resist. He only asked him to dress himself. He put on his ceremonial cloak, took his cane, stood up straight, and walked out of the hall, in which 127 candles burned, each with the carved name of his fictional guests. He said goodbye to each of them, in a whisper, into the air. At the gate, he looked back. Behind him was a castle he would never see again. Ahead was a cold carriage, soldiers, a doctor. He did not cry. He only said, "Please do not destroy my halls. I live there." They took him at night, not through the capital, but along back roads like a criminal. They covered his face with a dark veil so that no one would recognize him, although he had already become a legend, a living myth. Even the coachman was afraid to look at him and never turned around. The place of imprisonment was chosen to be Berg Castle, a gloomy building by the water, as if specially created to absorb the soul. There were no halls, no stars, no theater, only stone, damp walls, and a clock that never lagged. In his first letter from the castle, he wrote, "There is no sound, no image here. I have ceased to exist." Only one person remained with him, Dr. Bernhard von Gudden. He settled in the next room, watching him day and night. There was no guard between them, only a thin wall. The doctor kept a diary. The king is quietly silent. Sometimes he sings, sometimes he laughs, often does not sleep. He writes phrases in unknown languages on the walls with charcoal. Ludwig no longer answered questions. If asked who he was, he would say, "I was an actor in a play that you burned." He refused food if it was brought noisily. He once broke a mirror in the bathroom because it tried to move. Security reported that he walked barefoot through the rooms at night, leaving wet footprints, although the floor was dry. One day he was found standing on the windowsill, naked, with his eyes closed. He said, "If I fall, I won't break. I'll dissolve into another dimension." Dr. von Gudden insisted that he was fine, but he himself wrote more and more often. "He knows what we did. He is not angry, but there is no forgiveness in him." Rumors reached the capital. People began to gather at the castle, stood in the fog, waited to see if they would see even a silhouette. But the windows were tightly closed. Ludwig no longer looked outside. He continued writing letters. "Dear Swan, please take me. I am tired of the walls that breathe for me." He, who had created an imaginary world, was now a prisoner of someone else's. He, who had paid millions for emptiness, now lived in a room where even the silence did not belong to him, and all that was left for him was the lake outside the window, dark, motionless, like a mirror that could no longer be covered with fabric. June 13th, 1886 began with fog. It hung over Lake Starnberg like a wet shroud, hiding the shores, erasing the boundaries between water and air. Berg Castle stood silent. No steps, no voices. Inside, the king woke up later than usual. He sat for a long time by the wall, drawing a swan on the floor with the tip of a pair of scissors, without a body, just a neck, just a head, just a look. In the morning, he refused to eat. He asked only for a candle. "Put it by the window. Let it shine for the one coming out of the water," he said. Dr. von Gudden wrote it down, but did not ask. He was afraid to ask. During the day, Ludwig was silent. He looked at the wall. He touched his chest several times, as if checking if he was alive. He wrote short sentences on a piece of paper. "He who drowns inside is not afraid of water." Then he burned it. Around 6 p.m., he asked for a walk, for the first time in days, alone. This caused alarm, but they did not dare refuse. The doctor himself volunteered to accompany him. He put on his boots, a gray frock coat, and took a cane. Ludwig came out in a black coat without a hat, with a dark scarf around his neck. He looked transparent. The servant later said, "He walked as if he no longer touched the ground." They moved toward the lake. The fog was thickening. The guards remained on the shore, the last ones to see them. According to witnesses, Ludwig turned to the water several times and nodded, as if someone was standing there, and then he disappeared with the doctor into the whitish haze. An hour passed. No one returned. 2 hours later, the alarm sounded. Soldiers combed the park. They shouted, ran, shot into the air. No one responded. Only the wind stirred the reeds. Around 11 p.m., the bodies were found right by the shore, lying in shallow water, as if sleeping. Nearby was a broken cane and a crumpled handkerchief. Both had blue lips. Foam was coming out of their mouths. The king had scratches on his neck. The doctor had a deep abrasion behind his ear. There were wet spots on his clothes, as if they had been pulled. The official verdict? Drowned, but the lake was shallow. Ludwig knew its bottom. He had been swimming here since he was a child. He was tall, strong. Neither of them screamed. Neither of them called for help. The doctor died at the same time, 2 steps away. Drowning nearby and not being saved? The logic fell apart. During the autopsy, there was none. The king's coffin was sealed an hour later. The documentation disappeared. The doctor cremated without the family's permission. Rumor had it was an order eliminate both of them. Ludwig knew too much, wrote 2 strange letters, kept a diary where he described voices in the walls, murder plans, a pact between shadows. But there were other rumors too, darker ones, that the king himself had dragged the doctor along with him, that he believed that if 2 died together, one could return, that by the water he had said, "I cannot go alone. You have seen me. You are part of this world now." The servants at the castle reported the following morning that the candle placed by Ludwig in the window had gone out at the exact moment the bodies were found, and that after midnight, a voice had been heard singing the finale of Tristan and Isolde from an empty room. The king's letters disappeared. The rooms were sealed. The castles were abandoned. The legend remained. There is now a cross on the lake. It was erected quietly, without words. Initials and a date are carved into the stone. No reason, no circumstances. Those who saw the body said that his eyes were open and that the water in his hair smelled of incense, as if he had entered not a lake, but a temple or another reality. The king who built a world of marble and fantasy did not die in a castle. He died in the water, without witnesses, without explanation, without return. He died in a fairy tale he had built for himself. But why was there so much water in it?